commitment from one convention to another. How are we working? Maybe just if we think about how we are working with media. So usually the media coverage will be on the commitment at a certain point in time just after the conference, but very little follow-up afterwards on whether, you know, regularly monitoring whether there is actually progress towards that commitment or not, or does it make sense with new conventions that or anything that the government is signing, and if there is some kind of continuity with that. And it's useful to have more work and include more the media in terms of the importance of like investing family planning. We've done that in a few cases, and we've seen results in that where it's not just about covering the event itself, but like having all the different building blocks and making sure that there is a continuous coverage. And then there's some kind, so again, this will come in support of the civil society role in holding the decision makers accountable for all of what's being said and done. The media is also a good, of course, a good ally in that. And also thinking about the coalitions that we are working with, generally, like who do they include, and do we have people who can play that like more permanent and continuous role in kind of the watchdog role, or at least keeping like, so that things are staying in keeping the momentum going when there are good commitments going on.
I agree. I think that's a really important point is, like Justine said, in Nairobi, some of those people stood on that stage. We had prime ministers and very senior government officials making good statements. And so to go to them with those statements and see the progress, I'd be interested to know how many people are calling out them signing on to the Geneva Consensus Declaration. I think there's a balance on focusing on fulfilling promises that have been made versus calling out on bad things. And yeah, if anyone's done much between those two.
Yeah. Hello, can I chip in something? This is Esther.
Please do, Esther.
Okay, I'd like to focus more a bit on the national level and the disconnect that in advocacy that is between the ministry or the government and the civil society. Now, for instance, if you take an example, everywhere, I mean, civil society is not so pushful, advocacy is quite low concerning this. And then when a regional or a global advocacy intervention comes up, then the government quickly, you know, handpick some CSOs and then, you know, arrive at certain decisions. But I think one recommendation I want to make that probably funders too should keep up the momentum with the civil society at the national level, so that at every point in time, they're pushing for, you know, whether be it at the local, because there is that connection from the local to the international to the global, rather. So how are they holding their governments accountable in here? And then, you know, using that information, publicizing it, you know, in line with the media and all of that, so that, you know, the pressure is pulled from below, right up, so bottom up, and not the reverse when they quickly put things together and run up to Geneva to say this or say that. You know, so that's my recommendation, that funders need to do more around advocacy at the local level. Thank you.
Thanks, Esther. By the way, you'll probably meet my entire family moving behind in the background, so you know, don't worry about that. Any thoughts on what Esther's saying about empowering the sector? Yeah, Amanda.
May I add something? It's Amanda speaking now. I fully agree, Esther, and I think this is really important. I also, and that's really a big part of my work here in Malawi as well. I would like to be able to strengthen the voices of the people, because I think that's my experience from being here, is that there are laws and regulations, and there is one conversation, local conversation, then it's an international conversation, and then when you meet the midwives, which I meet the most, they are of a completely different opinion, but they have no voice, and they don't know how to raise their voices either. So strengthening their capacity to really push for this agenda, because they are facing daily, right, as we all know, these unwanted pregnancies and all, yeah, you know, all this. I don't have to mention that to you, but you understand. I think there's a large like discrepancy between what they would want to see happening in their countries, not only Malawi. And I think this is where we should work much more to strengthen, so that the power goes bottom up somehow. I just agreed with you, Esther. I don't know how to. I mean, of course, some things, but on a global level, I don't know how to solve this. Really.
Please feel free just to jump in. I think we're a small enough group that we don't need to bother with hands. Danny, maybe I can put you on the spot then and maybe ask you a question, because obviously Uganda is quite a challenging environment for advocacy around SRHR. And I think it's an environment where sometimes it's a bit easier and sometimes it's a bit harder, very often determined by who's in power in the White House. But, you know, if you look at that quite challenging environment of Uganda, you know, maybe going back to Amanda's point or Esther's point, do you think there's much more that we can be doing as stakeholders in the SRHR sector to really coordinate advocacy and have more impact?
Yeah, thank you. So I need to say that for me, first of all, I'm based, my area of expertise in service delivery. I'm a medical practitioner, but currently managing a project that is implementing family planning and SRH service delivery. So for us here, it's surely we have a lot of work to do in advocacy, right from community level, individual community level, to the government and you know, the rest of the stakeholders. Just recently, Uganda ratified the Geneva Convention, and then of course we are aware about the challenges that the previous administration in the US had on funding for general SRHR. But we have a number of civil society organizations here that are doing advocacy work. Recently, one of those civil society organizations, you know, in response to the government's signing of the Geneva Convention, put out, you know, a kind of a counter, excuse me, a counteractive, you know, statement. We are also having a number of international NGOs that are working with the Ministry of Health. So what we've done in Uganda is to make sure that the Ministry of Health is on board in most of these advocacy efforts that are led at the ministry level to make sure that even when we go to the lower level at the districts, we have you know, the blessings of the Ministry of Health, because in most cases here, like I guess also elsewhere, you know, it's top bottom. So what we're leveraging on is our allies in the Ministry of Health who are supporting us, like for example, in developing costed implementation plans. Recently, we visited some of the rural districts which have some of the highest fertility rates. And we were pleased that some of them already have costed implementation plans for family planning, and these help them to at the level of the district, which is like the political where the decisions which affect communities are made. When there is a costed implementation plan, resources will be easily allocated, from the district budget, and of course there are always competing priorities, roads and infrastructure. So those are some of the efforts that we are leveraging on to make sure that the advocacy reaches the communities that we serve. Yeah.
Can I jump in with a question? Not so much as a comment. Well, as I said, this is all quite new to me, and in fact, I've only joined DSW late last year, so I haven't even been to the project countries, not been able to travel there and see the projects for myself. But so what I know from Germany is that one of the largest projects that DSW has is an advocacy project, which is run in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. But not countrywide. So it's limited to different counties where they educate educate youth advocates, I would say. And so it would interest me to know what is your experience, maybe from your organizations, with coordinating activities also between different donors, maybe to reach more counties, or reach like a countrywide to reach a countrywide effort or something like that, if you know what I mean.
I think it's a great question, Micah. Would anybody like to jump in?
Okay. Yeah, thank you for your question. So in Uganda, what we're doing is with the leadership of the Ministry of Health, we have mapped out the different partners in the SRH space, and we mapped out every NGO's strength. So we have like a technical working group, which kind of gives oversight. We have a family planning consortium at national level that coordinates the different activities, and then we make sure that if we are having advocacy, like in form of messaging on the television or your mass media, it's cross-cutting, so that it's not seen to benefit only one partner, but a kind of a way in which we can kind of build on our different talents or different strengths, so that we can work together while everyone is putting their best foot forward in their sector, which they are experts on. So yeah, and also to avoid duplication. So that's what we're doing here in Uganda.
Thanks, Danny. Would anybody else like to add something?
You mentioned the Nexus initiative early on, which I think is a really important group to try and bring together different countries and kind of in those global spaces. And David and the team there, I think, have done a really great job, but I think it does need to go further. And I think that's what they're trying to do, is kind of going beyond sort of the usual European northern countries that have got a strong track record on these issues. So, because it's, yeah, there's only so much we can do, and kind of need to have some of the bigger conversations and have different champions. I think South Africa have done a really great job. They've led some of the joint statements, and I'd hoped kind of with Kenya hosting the Nairobi summit, that was a sign that they were kind of stepping up into that space. Yeah, I guess I'm interested to see if anyone's got any other thoughts on how we can, I guess, stop it being a Western voices being seen as the only progressive ones. in those global spaces, and where we need to take the conversation to allow that to happen? Is it that we need to go more into the health space? I think my experience and limited experience is that ministries of health tend to be more progressive on SRHR than other areas. It takes it slightly less contentious. We know we've got a fantastic, strong evidence base of the need for SRHR. Is that where we should be putting our attention? I definitely do not have the answer to that though.
Is anybody happy? I have an answer for Becky, for all of us.
I don't really have an answer for Becky, but also just maybe adding some other dimension to this. Looking at the conversations around SRHR and asking whether there's need for us to like reshape the conversation or reshape the messaging, in the sense that how do we make our leaders not to think that this is just SRH is not about abortion, it's not about just family planning, but it has all other aspects. You know, how do we make them see, use the local language sort of that will appeal to them. Like she said, that it shouldn't just be like the North bringing this to the South, but rather the South, we understanding it and presenting it in our own language, in the way we understand it, in the way it impacts and affects our health right now. I think there needs to be that reshaping of that advocacy messaging so that it resonates with our leaders here. And then, of course, at the broader or global level, then we can push it. That's my contribution. Thank you.
And where do you think those opportunities are? I guess it varies in each country, but I'd be interested to hear those of you who are in this context, kind of where you think those opportunities are.
Say that again, please.
Where do you think the opportunities are to make progress with your governments on these issues? I know it will vary in each individual country, but are there particular areas that you think there's a good opportunity to make progress over the next couple of years?
Maybe such opportunities could exist in terms of when, doing policy reviews, and especially sometimes when, like, I don't know how to say it, but let me give an example. Like recently, there was this a wider platform that was set up for reproductive, maternal, sexual and reproductive health, task force and all of that, that brought people from across all of the country, to come and sit and discuss from across diverse religion, So at that sort of platform, you needed to speak the language that both sides would understand, both Christians, both Muslims, and those that don't even, believe in anything. So the point is, how do you marry that in a country where you have different beliefs, different stands against it? But then that's why I'm saying that we need to speak from the language of how, what the impacts are, and, use that to inform the policy changes. But as for opportunities, I would think, again, that should be at the local level or national level would be around planning, when planning for both policy reviews, like we have the strategic health plan, and when it's time to review such strategic health plan, these are the ways we can infuse issues of SRH in there, and then ensure that civil society monitor those commitments when it's time for budget allocations.
May I ask you something, Esther?
Yes, please.
I'm just wondering if people feel that they have a say when it comes to these policy decision-making processes and so on, because my interpretation is that it's sometimes, or maybe even often, not the same people making the decisions as the one who would like to raise their voices. I mean, I can see a tendency of being completely shut down, you know, on social media, etc., if you are raising another type of voice. So there are strong conservative voices in many countries globally right now, right?
Yes,
And
there are.
then we also have the problem with the hierarchy, which is a barrier as well, somehow.
Yeah,
Did you get my question?
I did get your question. Yes, Amanda. You know, there are these dissenting voices, and there are very strong ones, of course, that can really shut down people. But one thing civil society, a few of them have been able to do is like pushing for that space for to be represented. I think that is one thing that some of these different coalitions have been doing consistently. And that you can only get through opening the space is also by ensuring that the government trusts you and you're able to build that trust. So one thing I've seen that has really opened doors for people is the trust issue. By the time they trust you, they're now open and they rely on you for credible information, rely on you, like when I say you, civil society and all that, for even, supporting them plan well. So before you get to that level, then you must have built that trust issue, which a lot of us too as NGOs, we don't really build that. Sometimes we build that as individuals, which is also a big problem. How can we build that as, a movement and as coalitions so that we can be able to make that representation broad and not just individualized representation? So challenges exist in both, divide. Thank you.
Esther, I really like that point around individual relationships as opposed to organizational relationships. So we're currently in this process, and Amanda may be aware of this. So there's a big joint UN, I don't know, sometimes when you say big joint UN, people go, oh, but there's a really exciting regional SRHR program with UNFPA, UNICEF, WHO, and UNAIDS. But one of the tasks of that investment is to really create this regional level SRHR coalition. So particularly bringing in, the regional level CSO voices. And as you're talking, I'm actually realizing that many of the partners that we are prioritizing are actually built on personal relationships. And that actually also we haven't really started to reach out to the INGOs yet. And I do sometimes think that UN and the bigger INGOs, we sort of get on with our own work sometimes quite separately. But I think you're right that those longer term organization to organization partnerships may start with the personal, but then how do you really build them so that they're more sustainable and they're built on trust? I don't have an answer, exactly. But you've made me think about it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a recommendation that people should look at. Yes, we don't have the answers, but we can begin to get that and see how we can build the knowledge around it and in the future start to work towards that area. Yeah.
Just one thought for me with all of these conversations, and I completely agree with the points you've been raising, Esther, of it needs to be kind of local groups and community groups that are empowered to hold their decision makers to account. I think one clear way that we need to do that as both INGOs, the UN, donor governments, is the kind of funding, like flexible long-term funding of those groups. And it's hard to do. Well, it's not hard to do. There's paperwork and boxes to tick that could be got rid of, but to stop doing small pots of money for very fixed projects we know that good advocacy can take a long time. You've got to be able to be flexible to respond to the changing situation. And kind of thinking back to the bigger question that you put to us about the opposition at the beginning, I think that's what they do really well. I think they have got a huge amount of money that they give out to lots of different groups, and let them get on with it and then bring them together. I wasn't at CSW, I think it was 2 years ago, but colleagues were, when there was a huge opposition and a particularly huge amount of young people, they're kind of opposing many of the things that have been put forward, and they were incredibly organised and coordinated in what they were doing. And that's just something that we need to get better at. And the sharing of messaging, I think, I'm not sure which organisations have done it, of sort of tracking some of the funding and messaging that happens across the world. And you might have this small organisation in Greece that's developing some anti-SRHR messaging, and then there's this small grassroots organisation in Uganda also doing it. And when you compare them, you see it's the same messaging and it's the same, you can track the funding back. I think the European Parliamentary Forum has done some great work on it if anyone's interested. But I guess the main point is longer term, more flexible funding for grassroots organisations.
Yeah, I can't agree more with you, Becky. Long-term funding, because actually, oftentimes, you know, they get very short-term funds and funders expect magic to happen. Advocacy is a long-term issue. I think we should get back to the old thinking and not the issue around, I think what they call it, low-hanging fruits. In fact, those kind of conversations really upset me, because it's a low-hanging fruits. What can you pick in advocacy within 1 to 2 years? Yeah, there are milestones that people can get to, but then let us understand that advocacy is a sustained actions that will take time for that change to come. Thank you.
Can I ask a question around, I mean, Mohammed mentioned media, Becky and Esther talked about messaging. So, you know, if you look at the WHO analysis of where people are getting their COVID information in Africa, for under 35s, the majority of them get it from social media. And, you know, I think sometimes, so for example, in Malawi, the abortion bill is currently under review. And, you know, there we have quite a long-standing relationship with the press, and there's been some very good balanced press pieces on the bill. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that many people are reading them. But, you know, at the same time, when there was a parliamentary hearing on abortion in Namibia, when you looked at the video recording of the discussion in Parliament and then you scroll down to the comments are mainly from the anti-choice movement. Even though we know in Namibia that we have many champions and that many people are ready to see legal and policy change in Namibia. So I sometimes wonder, how do we get those people to really engage in this social media space? Because I always feel that if we try and influence it, I mean, whether as an INGO or as the UN, then we are very open to criticism of, you know, being an external party that is pushing nationals to say certain things. But, you know, social media should be this very open democratic space where the pro-SRHR movement should be as active and as vocal as those who aren't. I think particularly in my region, there's many countries where open democracy and opportunity to do that. But I don't know whether anybody's been really harnessing the power of social media and that spontaneous, you know, voices from young people and others, because we really haven't worked out how to do that.
I can share an example from a very different, well, not different topic, but like so it was on a law to end violence against women and girls in Tunisia, which was voted 3 years ago, I think. And there was a coalition of over 60 women rights organizations working on it. And although Tunisia has like a a reputation of being pioneer in women's rights in the MENA region and the Arab world and all of that. And it's kind of an area that politicians are proud of. There was a lot of, after the revolution, there was a lot of conservative voices, and so they were the most vocal ones. They were the most organized ones and the most vocal ones. So we would know as a coalition at the time that if you take this to the street and ask, and you bring the debate to the street, it's not that there are more people that are against who will be in an opposition to this debate. So they will be unfavorable to the law passing or bring like counter arguments. It's just that they were the most vocal ones. And it's the same, I think, in the social media. It's just that they are, as Becky mentioned earlier on, it's also to the nature of the funding to these kind of organizations. Usually it's very different from like the kind of funding that the classic, let's say, funding that we have and like working with informal groups. You can't work with informal groups because they're not legally registered. So as a donor, you cannot really fund them because you have the IATI and you have all of the tracing. And so there are a lot of barriers in terms of the ways the funding goes now that makes it that when you are counting on volunteers from one side, so spontaneous people just acting out of the sense of justice against an organized, paid for social media. And this is, I mean, it's in Tunisia, I'm 100% sure that they actually found like the many Facebook groups with people paid for by the Islamist party there to really just go and comment. Like you'd find 100 comments against specific topics or videos and, you know, specific targeting. So it's an actual tactic. And that's kind of, so the balance of, I mean, the way to counter that is either through counter funding in a way, if you want to play with the same rules, or shifting the space of the advocacy. So like on the anti-violence against women law, the decision by the coalition was not to take it to the street because we knew that the voice, that's not where the fight would be won, but rather talk to parliamentarians, stay in the parliament, have the debate with the politicians and push that forward in that space, rather than going through protests and marches and things like that. Then in other spaces, I think it wasn't in Peru, there's a movement called ADVOCACY, which is very good. It's actually a coalition where there was a lot of like young investigative journalists who are really good in like creating content that's really good in social media. So partnering with them was really good to work on fiscal justice on Peru. So I'm talking about very different topics, but kind of the tactics there were good because involving these different new actors, if you are talking, I mean, you cannot try to mobilize youth without talking to the youth themselves and the investigative journalists. These are kind of the informal youth movements that are the ones that have the capacity to mobilize, and actually the role of these, like the sector is to provide the information, but then the way the information is used that's where the collaboration is. And also if we talk about academia. So just to share some experience from another sector. As I said, I'm used to this one. So.
Thank you, Mohammed. I just wanted to add to what you said, Justine, about the social media, because that was really my point. Also, that it's difficult to have a strong voice if you're not trained. Also, so I think that's the right way to go. Also, to empower and strengthening the capacity of doing advocacy on all levels. And then social media is a very, very important part of it today. Because if you are 10 friends in a medical ward, for example, or wherever on a grassroots level, then it's really, really difficult to stand out on social media and say something else. when there are hundreds of people. And my experience is that people often use the culture or the religious belief, or they use some very important issues, to give their statement strength somehow. And then that makes it even more difficult, because I don't want to be against my own culture, right? Or against my religion, or against. So that's also an important level, that it's okay to still be whatever I am and whatever we are in my group of people, and have this other type of opinion, and these 100 voices that comes up. Sorry.
In Uganda, our population is deeply religious, and many of them are Catholics. We also have a significant Muslim population. And as you know, these religions contribute a significant opposition to family planning programs. So at the last family planning conference in Uganda, religious leaders were invited from across the divide, including Muslim clerics and even Catholic priests, who, we try to broaden the discussion so that we can, expand our advocacy space, even for deeply religious Catholics who feel like if they can use the natural methods. We felt like that was a good starting point, so that, as we build this mindset change about use of modern contraception. And I think that those are some of the things that we are looking to build on in our advocacy efforts. We have identified like allies in the influential religious allies who can speak and people listen to them. Then in terms of social media, I want to agree with all the previous speakers that social media is a game changer, including here in Uganda. A lot of our messaging about SRHR, family planning, goes through the media. Goes through social media, and it's one of the tools that is the fastest source of information here. But unfortunately, currently in Uganda, we had our social media blocked. So you can imagine the damage in terms of access to information. So this is something that we need a lot of advocacy around this, so that we make sure that people continue to receive information. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Danny. I'm conscious that we're nearly at the end of our time, so I don't know if anybody just wants to share any final thoughts before we wrap up. I'm not going to try and summarize. Okay, so I think if there's nothing that anybody else wants to share, just to say thanks for making time. I always find it really stimulating just to, engage with a different range of people and voices and experiences in the sector, and, even talking about this together for SRHR advocacy platform that we're thinking through now. You've really given me some food for thought, which I really appreciate. So great to meet all of you. It's a small sector, so paths might cross again. Keep up the fight. Let's not give up. Thanks, everybody.
That's agreed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.